Good morning. It is a little bit difficult for me to interrupt your pleasant chatter. I think one of the nicest things about church is pleasant chatter. It also sounds a little bit like a turkey barn, but that's a whole different story. Welcome to church this morning. It is so nice to see some folks from different parts of the province with us this morning, what we are calling persons from east of 12. So we are delighted to have you join us just to get a sampling of what it is that we do here. And all the rest of you, please try to make a good impression. So let's sing it this time. Let's not just sit there like this like usual, but let's Okay, I just want to see if you are all wide awake, and you are. Any comments you have about the sermons, you can send me in the mail afterwards. We have this little light, and today I'm very glad to say that it's a little image of that wonderful yellow light that is shining in the sky. I'm always impressed how a little light 93 million miles away can make such a difference in how I feel about the day. And today I feel pretty good. It's nice after a long cold snap. And then also this week in the church I found this plant. Does anybody know what it's called? Amaryllis. Amaryllis. Lots of you do. And I thought it's splendid that at this midwinter point that we should have this token of change, of resurrection, of new life, of spring. This flower gives us a symbol of something to look forward to in the natural realm and in the spiritual realm. So we are here today to enjoy the love of God that is invested in each one of us, and as each one of us reaches out with that love to bless all the rest of us. This way or that. It seems to be the question this morning. Do I do this or do I do that? I'm a little scared to do anything. I have this week, looking towards this day, had various images in my mind, and one came to the forefront and has sort of persisted. And that was a memory of the day in which I married Barbara, which is now 31 years ago, and a couple of months. But during our marriage, I had opportunity to say a few words. And you folks, most of you know that I'm capable of speaking for a fair period of time without too much thought. But on that day, I was very, very brief. And I said to the gathered company of family and friends and neighbors, everything I have to say to you can be summed up by you going home and at every opportunity you have watching Little House on the Prairie. Amen. And I thought about that this week. Because Barbara and I, after 30 years of marriage, continue to watch Little House on the Prairie. And we also like to watch the Waltons. Now, are you folks familiar with these two stories, the Little House on the Prairie and the Waltons? What I liked about them is that they represent the point of view of two authors in an early stage of our Western development. And what we see in these stories is the memory of persons who grew up in contexts that shaped them. And both stories, some folks suggest, are a bit too nostalgic and not too realistic. But I disagree with that. And what I really like about these two stories is that they represent a way of life that was common and valuable. And if you know the story, you realize that the folks in both of these families, the Waltons and the Ingalls, both these families go through seasons involving the environment. There are storms, there's winter, there's drought, there's forest fire. There's all these natural things that challenge them and bless them. Their favorite fishing spots, places where they like to walk, where they like to meet their friends and talk. But in the main, in these stories, the people shared their experience in the land. That is to say, when sorrow came, everybody got a taste of it. When joy came, everybody got a taste in it. And in many ways, joy and sorrow were two high values. Sorrow deepened people. It made them wider and deeper, as I said. What it was is that it carved them out. And a poet by the name of Hildebrand suggested that this carving out by sorrow opened the space to be filled by joy. And so these folks knew what it was like to be pregnant with a child and to lose that child when you had such great hopes for it. These folks knew what it was like to plant your fields, to watch them grow, to see them come to full maturity, and then to anticipate a wonderful harvest, and then hail comes. And the whole crop is wiped out, and all the family's dreams are discouraged and dismayed. In both of these stories, we see people struggling with life. The point I would like to bring home today is that that struggle was generally done in community. It was done as family. It was done as neighbors. It was done as communities. Most of us here in rural Manitoba have memories of this kind of life. I remember once when I was working nearby Warren and having lunch in one part of the county, and then realizing after that lunch that I had forgotten lunch in another part of the county, driving all the way across, getting there in time for coffee, but this lady had already heard that I had lunch and been late at this lady's house. This was before the intranet. And what I'd like to point out about that is that the culture in Little House on the Prairie, the culture in the Waldens, the culture that most of our parents and grandparents experienced was a culture of people being in it together. Now, I too, like those authors, are contemplating maybe writing down some of my memories of growing up in Canada. And what I'd like to suggest that if I start to write this down, my observations will not be the same as the authors of Little House on the Prairie and the Waltons. My observations will be that with our success as people in the land, we got prosperous. And with that prosperity, we got ease. And with that ease, we got relaxed. And with that relaxation, we began to neglect some of the things that were very, very important. Now, an example I have of that is in the Waltons. Regularly after supper, the family would get together in the front room, turn on the old tube radio, let it warm up, and then listen to a drama or a news report from the president or something that was going on, and they would listen as a family. And you know how it is now. It doesn't matter where you go in Canada, basically what you see is this. Now that's a change. And the basic change, and I use that only as an indication, the basic change has been that we have moved from being communities dependent on one another to becoming individuals independent of one another. And this is not rare. This is not specific to us in Manitoba in this generation. This is a pattern that happens in history again and again. In fact, it is the pattern of the Bible. Hardship, industry, thrift, prosperity, taking it easy, decadence, and decline. We are in a world, Barbara read a little bit to me this morning from The Observer, where anxiety is becoming a major social and health problem. Anxiety is everywhere in our society. And researchers are beginning to notice that anxiety is becoming epidemic among very young children. Now, when we go to the Waltons and we go to the Ingalls, we see these kids and their families struggling with all of life's hard issues. But in a basic sense, what they know is that they are loved, that they are cared for, that they have a part to play, and that their lives have meaning. But in our generation, some of that has slipped away. And we see this. We see this in a particular way in the decline of rural communities. So with the introduction of television in 1950, things began to change, and now more folks are learning about the world from television or from the little machine in their pocket or the computer on their desk. More folks are learning in that way than they are learning from hearing stories from grandma and grandpa, hearing adventures from uncle and auntie, sharing playground time with kids in the school, climbing trees, going fishing, walking in the woods. Kids are not learning in that way anymore. They are learning in what I will call artificial ways. And because they are learning in these artificial ways, it's leaving a hole inside of them. And some of us are already experiencing that hole as adults. And we are wondering why, if we've made so much progress, is there so much unhappiness and distress and discouragement? Now, that's a big question. And it's a question we're struggling with here in our presbytery. We're struggling with it in our conference. We're struggling in it in our church. We're struggling in it with all other churches of our liberal tradition. And we are wondering, is there a solution? And I would like to suggest that the two texts today point us to a way forward that offers hope. And that way forward consists in this image of this servant of God who is doing whatever is possible to make a positive difference, to bring people out of their captivity to ideas that are hurtful and destructive to them, to bring them out of those ideas and into new ideas that are helpful and beneficial. And that brings me to the little story in John about Jesus coming forward to be baptized. And you folks here who know me well are aware that I do not have a high and holy theology about who Jesus represents for us. That is to say, I'm fully aware that the Bible speaks of Jesus as the child of God. But I know that in speaking that way, the Bible uses Jesus as an example for us, so that we can realize in the same way that Jesus is a child of God, we are children of God. The basic difference between us is Jesus is not lost the way we are lost. Jesus is in direct connection with God, and he knows what it is that God has in mind for a human being that will bring blessing. Now we are going to go through a season of watching Jesus walking about from town to town. Just like we represent here various communities of faith in our presbytery. Jesus would go to Beausejour, or Jesus would go to Piney, Jesus would go to all of our little towns. And he'd pop in for a while. And maybe he'd have dinner with folks, and then they'd invite their friends, and maybe somebody would break out a guitar and they'd start to sing. And Jesus would start to tell stories, or Jesus would ask other people to tell stories. But what they had was a discouraged population being encouraged by this person, Jesus, who knew that God intended good for people, and he knew that that good had been lost sight of because of decisions people had been making. So today, when we look at the baptism of Jesus in the Gospel of John, I am hoping that each one of you will remember your own baptism. And I'm hoping that each one of you will remember that in that act you made a decision, or your parents made a decision for you, hopefully a decision which you confirmed in your young adult years. But that decision is to give up his own interest. Jesus lays down everything he has done up until the age of 30 or thereabouts, and he puts that way of life down, and he picks up another way of life. And the other way of life is wholly oriented to the good of the neighbor. And that's the big difference between the world of the Waltons and the Ingalls and our world. Our world is wholly interested in the good of the individual. So where we used to depend on one another at harvest time to make sure we could get the crop in, when we used to depend on one another as a barn burnt down and we built another one together, when we had community picnics, we were in it together. And that has been dissolved by various influences. The most powerful influence of all being that television set, that computer, which is teaching our young kids what it means to be human. So today, being a diverse group of people representing diverse historical communities, I am hoping that each one of you in your own personal identity will make that decision that Jesus made. To say, yes, I've done well up to this point, but now I want to dedicate myself to the good of my neighbor. And as we begin to do this, we will begin to see the change for which we are longing. And I offer this personal decision and this personal growth as an alternative to the strategies on which we have been depending for so very long. If only we can get the right program. If only we can get the right equipment. If we can get the right expert. I'm hoping that we will continue to use all the means that are available to us, but that those means will not be the source of our trust. The source of our trust will be the individual person who has dedicated all available resources to the good of the community. Now, this matters to us as small church communities, but if we succeed, if we can raise up a model of people working together, playing together, eating together, enjoying one another's company, sharing in one another's burdens, sharing in one another's joys, if we can begin to revive that sense of community, we will be reviving a sense of hope in the world. And I'm not saying that this ends with church on Sunday mornings. Sunday mornings in church is only a middle point, a point into which we come out of our week and out of which we go into our week. And hopefully that this is a cycle, coming in and going out, and that we are growing in the way of God, and that we are turning aside from the way of the world. So my title today was This Way or That. And that's the choice each one of us faces as a person. It's the choice we face as communities. Do we want to go this way or that? And what I encourage you to do is to go the way of personal responsibility to the common good and go the way of community over possessive individualism. Let's be in this together. Let's be a people dedicated to making a difference in our world. And God being our helper, we will have good success. I'm going to ask you to join in singing a song, Let Us Build a House. And I'm going to use the word house here as a metaphor. Let us build a gathering of people that is strong in the joy of God. Let us build a house.